right, welcome to a very special episode of Cosmic Road where we are joined by the one and only Christopher Noel. Thank you so much for joining the show, Christopher.
Hey, Jack, it's great to be back. I'm excited to talk to you because you've been killing it lately.
Well, thank you, man. Well, you've been killing it too. Christopher has come out with his new book. He's Homegrown Monsters. Very awesome cover in a very good book. Christopher said he wanted to talk about chapter 8. So I was going to read chapter 8 to talk about, and I couldn't stop reading. I finished the whole thing. I loved it. Very well written, well researched. It covers a lot of territory, a lot of different aspects to the phenomenon. And I really, really salute you for an awesome book. So congratulations, Chris.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I
How many
thought you were
books?
just going to stick to chapter 8, but my secret hope was that you were going to say, yeah, well, I couldn't stop reading after that. So there you go.
Oh, I couldn't. I finished the whole book. Now I've restarted from chapter 1 and I'm working my way back up to chapter 8. Uh, so I guess we can start with what is the Challenger consciousness?
Yes, good starting point. Well, okay, well, that's there's so much. It's difficult to get traction when I'm just trying to speak. Speaking is not my forte. Writing is a bit more my forte. Um, but I'll do my best to articulate these thoughts. It's very important thoughts. Well, the first chapter of the book, I'll just start there and work up to chapter 3, where I introduce my idea of a challenger consciousness. The first chapter, well, no, you asked about challenger consciousness, so I'll just answer that. I feel as though it's possible to see the whole array of UAP and spiritual and potentially demonic and heavenly, divine, and all these types of incursions into our ordinary reality as all separate entities or separate impulses from the beyond with separate agendas and different moral colorations, but how in analysis there are lumpers and splitters, and I think I'm more of a lumper. I like to lump as much together that seems similar to me as possible, and so I think that there is a truly divine, transcendent um, space in our reality, and then there's these others that have been pestering humankind and in some cases torturing humankind and seeking to exploit or capitalize upon us in various ways ever since the beginning of history. And I'm grouping them under one umbrella called the Challenger consciousness, which is a different kind of consciousness from ours, a different form. And it seems to, for some reason, and I speculate in the book, for some reason it seems to um, hanker after our form of consciousness. It seeks to draw from us our form of consciousness, which could also be called the soul. And I think what no one can know the origin of all this, but from what we can see so far of the history of these incursions, not from angels and from the true God that you could call source, or love, the unifying force of the universe, but from this other kind of consciousness, which I see as distinct. What it's been trying to do is piggyback on us in order to have a soul like ours. And by soul, I don't mean something that's contained in us, but I think that these aliens, this challenger consciousness, I think they think that it's a thing that is contained by us. You know how Mr. Lazar said that the aliens think of us as containers for souls. I think that's a category mistake that they make. This is my speculation, my hypothesis. And they think that the human soul, and by extension, the souls of natural animals, is a commodity, a something that can be stolen or liberated from us, or siphoned off from us, and then they'll be able to transcend as far as we can when we die. But it seems that they're unsuccessful in this, or else they wouldn't be constantly boomeranging back and forth between in their invisibility state, their low density, high frequency, invisible default state, which is where they mostly are, and the dense Earth state, where they come down briefly, briefly, over and over and over, millions and millions of times, all in an effort, I'm suggesting, to um, join the natural world, but they're not a part of the natural world. All they can do, this consciousness, is to make use of the raw materials of our natural world, including zoological raw materials, where they make alien beings, where this consciousness, through something very like the telekinesis or psychokinesis that we can do, some of us can do, they are using the raw materials such as reptilian raw materials, insectile raw materials, and humanoid raw materials that have come through billions of years of evolution. They cannot but use these. They can't manifest from scratch. They have to employ whatever it is that we have on this planet in order to materialize and try to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish.
You don't see like the gray aliens as like distinct real beings, or the mantis beings as distinct real beings, or reptilians and so on, but as something created by whatever the phenomenon represents.
Well, they're
Uh,
real. Yeah, they're real, and this is why the Nazca mummies is so exciting to me and to you and to so many of the rest of us, is that they're definitely real, and these things, can be studied in terms of their DNA, and their we can see all of the intricate anatomy that they present to us. So they've died, and the consciousness has fled from them. So we just have the bodies. But the mere fact that they have DNA that can be read, understood in the same format as our own DNA and the whole rest of the animal kingdom on Earth, tells me that they didn't evolve on some foreign planet. Because all for chapter one, a long chapter, I go through many examples of how um, staggeringly unlikely it is that any one of these three branches would have evolved to be what it is today: insects, reptiles, and primates, including us. It's just astoundingly unlikely that any one of them would, and more than twice, much more than twice as unlikely that two of them would. And then you have three of us, and these are the body plans that are reported by eyewitnesses and abductees and contactees to be used by this other form of consciousness. It's hard to encapsulate all this all at once. As you can see, I'm struggling, but so
take
chapter
your
one.
time and lay it out in the way that you think is best and most logical. But so, all right.
Well, bless your heart for that.
I,
I take
I,
a breath.
I,
Oh, go ahead.
I love that your theories encapsulate so much, and that you have your own way of explaining so much, including why beings during abduction experiences are interested in our souls. I've made several videos talking about the evidence for that, and they do, and that seems to be a focus of theirs, but it's not a widely known focus. It doesn't get nearly as much play as the hybridization project, which they seem a little bit more open about and willing for that information to come out. They are much more restrictive of other information that they don't want out. And some of that may be central to that. Maybe they're focused on consciousness and souls. And you also, your theories go some way to explaining, mantids and reptilians and so on, and how they resemble so closely things here on Earth. So I really love a lot of your theories. And I want you to explain it and lay it out for us in whatever way you think is the most logical.
Picture a cityscape with all sorts of, from a distance, you can see the skyline, and you get closer and closer, then you can see individual windows in the office buildings, and you can begin to see smaller buildings, not skyscrapers. And then you get closer, say you're in a drone, okay? Get closer and closer, and then you start to see individual little businesses and houses, and then there's a suburb over there and a suburb over there, and there's like millions of households. And then just randomly, you zoom closer and closer, and you get to one door in this whole city and suburb complex, this metroplex. You get to one door, and there's a keyhole, and you put your key in there, and it unlocks that door, and you can go in. Well, that whole premise, that scenario, is what it's like for one step of evolution in, say, insects to have taken place among all the other possible ways that it could have gone. There's just, it's just so contingent, so random in a way that for instance, and this is about all of complex life, not insects, that at one point, after 3 billion, yeah, 3 billion years of single-celled microbial life on our planet, there would be suddenly within grand scales of time, there'd be this event where one of these, where not one, but where these single-celled creatures engulfed a smaller creature, another microbe that was smaller, and instead of digesting that, this smaller creature remained viable and living inside. And eventually, when all of these swallowing events occurred and they all remained living, this became one of the main organelles inside of cells that ended up being what we call eukaryotic cells, which have a nucleus. And this swallowed entity is the mitochondria. If not for this turn of events, of the developed symbiosis between the smaller creature and the larger creature, we wouldn't have the kind of cells that we have that allowed multicellular, more and more complex life to evolve. And this is one example out of thousands and thousands and thousands of things that happen, little turns and twists and turns in the plot of natural history that drove us down the road of any one species that exists today. And most of the kind of fortunate accidents that took place are still concealed from us because we're only in the last 20 years being able to read genomes back through time into deep time to put together the puzzle of any given species development to come to how it is today. So you picture this cityscape zoom into one door happening hundreds and hundreds and thousands of times over billions of years, and especially hundreds of millions when it comes to large animals. And you realize that the chances of this occurring on Earth for three branches that we talk about in relation to what aliens look like, and I say aliens in quotation marks because I don't think they're from a foreign planet. I think that's just so unlikely. Foreign planets may have microbes, and these microbes may develop, but they're going to develop in their own peculiar, very, very idiosyncratic way that's not going to mirror closely the animals that we have here. It just seems to me impossible. Um, so, so that's one idea. That's all chapter one. And then chapter two, which I shall now proceed to read in its entirety. It's 35 pages, so sit back and relax. No. um, Chapter two is seeking to establish that consciousness is independent of the physical world and especially of our brains. And I go through all sorts of angles of approach to that realization, that recognition, and many of them will be very familiar to your listeners, your viewers. So I'm not going to, go through them. But for instance, I spend a lot of time on the telepathy tapes, which has recently brought the whole issue of the independence of consciousness, of the larger consciousness beyond that transcends individual consciousness, that's brought that to a much higher profile in the public consciousness. It just really took the world by storm. You see lots of advertisements where it says this product is taking the world by storm, and it's usually BS almost always. But in this case, the telepathy tapes really, eclipsed Joe Rogan for certain weeks of last fall. And
That's
so,
huge.
oh, it's so big. And I'm currently really excited because there's this thing coming up in the beginning of August, this conference called Sci Games International, which has been put together by this wonderful man named Hakeem Isler. And I recommend people go to Sci Games International YouTube channel And there was also an interview with Hakim just a month ago on New Thinking Aloud, where he lays out this entire thing, and it's desperately exciting. I've been wishing for something like this, where it can draw the attention of millions and millions of viewers who are open to this sort of thing, but otherwise wouldn't have a focal point, um, to uh, remote viewing, telepathy, even psychokinesis, which is really big in my own thinking. Psychokinesis, the ability of, it's not mind over matter, because mind itself is a form of energy, which is a form of matter. It's just a whole different frequency. Um, but it's the ability of consciousness to affect and to manipulate the our familiar physical world, the physical reality that we think of as physical. So I just bring that up to say that I'm given that consciousness is independent and is able to know everything. Like, we can be given the remote viewers that are gifted in remote viewing can be given a 6-digit number that refers to, like, a schoolroom in Uganda. And with nothing but that 6-digit number, they can tune in and they can say what the contents of that room in Uganda are. Not because they actually travel to Uganda, but because all information is vibrationally encoded, it seems undeniable, in frequencies that can be tuned into by our consciousness, because we are our individual consciousnesses are part and parcel of the larger consciousness. Um, so, but not only does consciousness have access to all information, amazingly, mind-bogglingly, but it also can act upon the physical world. So those two things I try to really push into the forefront in this book. So then that allows me to kind of explore the idea that this challenger consciousness can manipulate the raw materials of our Earth, both organic materials to make these creatures that just happen to look almost exactly like the ones we already know from natural history, our animal kingdom, but also they can manipulate other sorts of matter, including metallic elements, to forge UAPs, their craft. And they can move these craft about, not through some exotic propulsion system, which everybody, all the scientists who are into this subject are seeking. What's the propulsion system? But instead, the same sort of prime mover um, um, capacity that allows certain psychically gifted people to make tables lift up. And people have been studied who can affect matter on a microscopic level with random event generators. They can make more ones than zeros appear much, much above the random 50-50 that you would expect. And then unfolding out of the microscopic, people can do it on a much, much more macro level. I have a quote from Leslie Kean, a hero in the UFO community, but also a investigative journalist in the life after death space, and she has participated in a seance in England for many years, and she's seen objects levitate, just levitate with no propulsion system, but by means of consciousness itself. And she says, quote, "When you can sit in a room and watch objects levitate before your eyes, which I've done many times, and so have many others, there's got to be a physics, a scientific explanation of what is going on to make that happen. And I wish that more scientists were curious about this. This is actually happening. Where's that curiosity?" And when people encounter the grays, um, for instance, the school children in Zimbabwe, they said that these little men were floated through the air. They didn't walk on the ground, and many people report the same thing, that these avatars of the challenger consciousness, this other consciousness that seeks to join our consciousness over and over, and it fails over and over throughout the millennia, is my idea. But these levitating grays They don't use some propulsion system. They're not making heat. They're not using any energy that we would recognize. Neither are the UAPs. Anything that was energy, um, chemical, nuclear, or electromagnetic would create a great deal of heat. And many times when thermal cameras are trained upon these unidentified flying objects, they're cold, which flies directly in the face of thermodynamics, which the first law of which says that energy cannot be destroyed. It only is changed into a different form. So energy that allows like a colossal ship, like the Phoenix Lights vehicle, to move through the air would create just an incalculable amount of exhaust, of not literal exhaust like from our car, but would convert into heat in any kind of energy form that we understand. So I think it's consciousness instead of any mechanical or electromagnetic force. And no one seems to be talking, very few people seem to be talking about this. Every now and then, someone will allude to the centrality of consciousness in this whole thing, but people still are mostly stuck within the materialistic paradigm. And so they're trying to seek sort of warp drive explanations for how these craft move. But you need not go there. It's all right in front of our eyes. We have a century and a half of very um, rigorously documented psychic and spiritual research in which psychokinesis, PK, is proven. And it's in our case, it's child's play compared to what this other kind of consciousness is able to do. We can. I have a video on my YouTube channel. The channel is called Impossible Visits, and the video is anti-gravity without technology. And it shows an example outdoors. So you know there's no monkey business going on with fishing line or anything. Outdoors, these four people have their hands on top of this table on a porch outdoors, and it rises up. There's no propulsion system. It's consciousness, man.
Now, I would throw in here because I have some experience with both levitation and telekinesis, that we may be looking at something more energetic, maybe less consciousness driven, although obviously consciousness is driving it. But there does seem to be such a thing as chi, as energy, as the force, prana, vril, whatever you want to call it. And I don't know if your research has touched on that at all, but I like the idea that some of these craft could be being powered by whatever force that is, whether it's a consciousness force or an energetic force. That the Bugosphere could be lifted up by whatever that is.
I'm so
Again,
glad.
whether it's consciousness or energy. You know,
I'm so glad you brought that up because it reminds me that it's important to stress that consciousness isn't this nothingness. It itself is energy and matter. It's just at a higher frequency. So that it is, I think, it is chi, it is prana, and the other names that our civilizations have given to this primal thing. It's what animates our bodies. I mean, the notion that this challenger consciousness can incarnate, animate an alien body is not any different from how we're incarnated by our consciousness. You know, it's the same kind of thing. Consciousness is able to do that. It's able to infuse and control um, physical objects, and we're a physical object. I don't know about you, but I certainly feel like it every morning. And so I think that you're saying something no different from what I'm saying, which is that I think that consciousness is energy. It has to be energy. It has to be matter, or else it's not anything. It's got to be energy and matter, which Einstein taught us are two sides of the same coin. Energy and matter are one thing, interchangeable. And so I think the consciousness is a higher level of that, higher in terms of frequency and a lower density. So many things I've been able to quote in my book talk about the us being at this high density plane of existence, and the Whitley Strieber talks about this. The aliens are naturally much lower density, and they're invisible. And then they struggle to come down, and they can only do so briefly into our little world here, and where they get dense. Let's get dense, guys, and they come down and get dense, and they try to do what they're doing, and then they have to revert to their natural state, which is low density. And what happens to those bodies when that happens? They're actual bodies that people can sometimes touch, and that when they die, we can have in the form of Nazca mummies, etc. Well, they dissipate in terms of their density, and then they re-densify when they come back. I think that one of the gifts of the this alternative consciousness, this challenge of consciousness, is that it can modulate density of physical objects. That includes alien bodies. When they die, just like when we die, then there's this husk of an alien body that can be dissected and x-rayed and tomographied. Um, and its DNA, which operates on the same format as our DNA, can be analyzed, sequenced. But then there's it's a continuum. Like sometimes when a ship goes down, a craft, a UAP, people get parts of it, little metallic parts of it, and these seem to have some vestigial degree of consciousness themselves itself. People have seen the little pieces kind of move around and organize and come together, not through magnetism, but through a certain intention, it seems. And this one guy, I forget his name, had some of these pieces of material, and they would levitate by themselves, not through any electromagnetic, housing. There's like a remnant of consciousness in some of these metallic, recovered metallic pieces, and there's a degree of consciousness left in the captured and imprisoned aliens that we've gotten, like the one in the Alien Interview, and I think Skinny Bob, and I think a bunch of others, so that they're denatured to an extent. They're not still filled with the power of the consciousness they originally had when they were free. They're now not free. They've been drained partly of their consciousness, and they're not able. They don't. You know, before we, it's hard to explain. It's just
Is that because they become more dense by coming
yeah,
into our reality?
yeah. And you can get stuck down here. Normally they have to go back. Um, it's not unlike our own spirits. When we die, some of us can come back and briefly re-densify. I hope that's a word. And
It
then,
is
but we can't
now.
stay long. It is now. I got that. I nailed that. But they can't stay long, right? Ghosts don't stay around. They appear for a minute or two, and then they dissolve gradually. And what it is they're going back to their high frequency, low density state where we can't see them anymore, and we think that they're just ceasing to exist or something. But no, they're still right there. Our loved ones are still, their location and distance are illusions. Our loved ones are as much right here in front of us as up in heaven someplace.
That's what near-death experiencers say. They say it's not somewhere way out there. It's like
Yeah.
we're in the next room.
Or
Uh,
even in front of our nose.
yeah.
That office in Uganda is as much in front of our nose as it is 7,000 miles away in Africa. It's just a matter of frequency. And we've only scratched the surface in understanding how frequency can possibly contain and carry and curate so much reality, but that is apparently it. Tesla says if you want to understand reality, understand vibration and frequency. And Einstein said everything is vibration. And really, it's it's easy to think of this for a minute or so, and then you sort of forget about it. But really, it comes down to that. And John Keel is all about frequency and vibration. And his whole notion of the super spectrum is very similar to what I've been thinking about. Not that he got it from me, but rather great minds think alike. That's what it is. But he thought it was all electromagnetic, and that all of the whole sort of array of kinds of entities, down to dense up to super rarefied, are all different modes of electromagnetic um, energy. But I have a part in the book that tries to show that consciousness is not on the electromagnetic spectrum, but it can manipulate electrons, so that's why a lot of supernatural events, encounters affect our lights and our cell phones and our cameras. And I'm sure you've had that happen in ghost hunting where your
Oh yeah.
camera
Oh yeah.
completely goes kaflooey.
Oh,
That's
man,
because,
I have, multiple videos I could show you of shadow beings where they can walk through a doorway, and then after a second, the light will go out, and then after another minute, it will come back on. Or else an orb will be hovering in a room and it'll flicker, and the light in the next room will go off. Um,
well, remember they just 3 weeks ago when the Ring camera got that weird little gray or whatever he is, this little non-human upright walking entity, and Latchkey Hustle showed very, very granularly that as it passes by, um, various electrical malfunctions occur in the lights, and the video itself pixelates in different places, and that's because I think that part of what that the other consciousness uses to manifest is electricity. That's part of the energy slash matter that exists abundantly in our world, and so naturally they inhabit that. And this is why I never agree with the whole concept of cloaking, because cloaking implies that their default state is visible and solid, and they have to hide it. But instead, I think their default state is invisible and low density, and that they can then materialize with effort. It takes energy to do that. They materialize briefly and then they dematerialize. But there's never a case of needing to cover up something solid, because that something solid is the thing they're doing, not covering anything up. And then they withdraw back into their natural state of invisibility. So there's a lot to this, man. But the Boogosphere, you brought up the Boogosphere, and I was delighted to see that come on our radar screen, because it seemed to some extent corroborate the direction I was thinking in, which is that this other consciousness can manipulate density. Because according to the eyewitness, the man who retrieved this, it was only, you've gone through this and we've all heard about this, almost everybody listening right now, but it started out being 2 kilometers, not kilometers, kilograms. And the guy was able to easily carry it under one arm. So that's 4.4 pounds, I believe. And then over the next few weeks, it gained weight, and it currently is 10.1 kilograms, which is 24 pounds, which is a quadrupled, at least maybe quintupled as much weight as it
that's
had
crazy.
in the beginning. And so my thought is that, yes, when it was floating around in the air that day in March of this year, and the people were videotaping it, it weighed less than zero. So its density had decreased in order to, and this is how all these UAPs are, I believe, is that they're up there weighing less than zero. And that's how they're buoyant in the air, just like a balloon or a floater is buoyant in water. They weigh less, they're less dense than the surrounding um, atmosphere. And so they're up there. So the density can change, I think, according to conscious intent, because this other consciousness is much better at psychokinesis than we are. What we can do, as I said, is child's play compared to what they can do. But it's important, I think, to keep in mind the distinction between difference of kind and difference of degree. If we can float a paperclip 1 inch off the desktop, this is a proof of concept that things can become lighter than air through the application of conscious intent. So that's just a difference in degree, this paperclip, to from what is being done with large UAPs. It's not a difference in kind. See, because any object can be made to be less dense than the air around it and can therefore float. And then intent can move it around anywhere it wants to go. Um, Robert Bigelow said alien technology really does exist, but it's consciousness driven. And that's one of the driving concepts behind this book of mine.
Okay, so let's get into why you think the beings or the phenomenon is here and how they are interacting with us. You have some very specific theories about why you think they're here and what they're up to. Why do they engage in hybridization and all that stuff? So why don't you take us through that?
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's one of the main puzzles I was trying to work out. Like, what the heck are they up to? I don't think there's, from the mere fact that they've been messing around with us for thousands and thousands of years, I don't think they're interested in eradicating us, the human race. I don't think they're interested in taking over. I think
If
they
they are,
want
they're doing a really bad job
really
of it.
slow developing play, like in basketball. That's one slow developing play. Um, but no, I think they need us to flourish, which is why in the beginning of civilization, of when we learned the agricultural revolution and metallurgy and all this stuff, like between 6 and 10,000 years ago, um, we were apparently helped along, and all sorts of mythologies embed this notion that whether it's the Anunnaki, the Elohim, or any number of other types of deity that they had back then that they thought of, they would often help us, teach us how to, you know, flourish in terms of our agriculture, our animal husbandry, and then later making smelting metals and advancing as civilizations. I think they need us to flourish because it's kind of like a parasite host relationship. I think that they need something from us, and what that something is, as I alluded to earlier, is the soul. But they think that the soul is something they can get from us. But in fact, I think it's a bandwidth of frequency of potential, of our potential. And we came from this much higher frequency before we were born. I believe, many will scoff at this, but and then we in some sense chose to enter a dense life, living as a spirit, living a human life, and then we go back. I can say up there, not in terms of location, but in terms of, again, frequency. And then so I was thinking along these lines, and then I came across the work of Nigel Kerner, who has this book called Gray Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls. And he crystallized it in a way that I hadn't been able to, and I'm very indebted to this. He says, the whole Gray mission is a search to accomplish a natural living process rather than a continually manufactured one. They want to accomplish the trick of being born. See, instead of beside just trying to, they want to be us. They see that we have a wider bandwidth than they do. And that's another main premise I'm working with, is that they have a narrow, powerful, but narrow bandwidth. They can't transcend down here for long because they're not naturally built for that. So they can only stay briefly, and they're ping-ponging back and forth, nor can they transcend into heaven, whatever you want to call that. But they know that we can. They see that we can, and so can our animals, our cats and dogs, and so can foxes, and probably birds and such. So they're ravenous for this because they're stuck. They're bottled up in this kind of bandwidth trap, this eternal limbo. They're in there, and so they want to merge with us. And I think that's behind the entire hybridization program. Um,
No, I like that a lot. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I've heard similar ideas before, and I've talked a little bit about that on the channel.
yeah,
This idea that, if we're here in the third dimension and heaven or the higher dimensions are up here, and I know you don't like the word dimension, insert density, whatever you want to call it. And I have, in my conception of things, there are both dimensions and densities. And here I am not using dimension in the correct sense. But whatever. I can explain my concept of dimensions another time. But
some
yes,
other.
so yeah, we come from this higher level and we descend into this level to experience this reality, but they live somewhere in between. They are stuck in this limbo, as you call it, this one of these sets of densities or dimensions, whatever that is, and they want to get here. Where we're ultimately from, but for whatever reason, they can't. So they are hybridizing and experimenting and doing things ultimately to get to that point. I think that's a fascinating idea. Now, could that be something like what the Nazca mummies represent? Is this hybridization process where they are trying to create physical beings that could then transcend into that higher level, or other hybrids that we've learned about?
I mean, I think the Nazca mummies are just the tip of the iceberg, and
Oh, for
even that
sure.
makes them sound a larger share of the whole thing. I think they're just a microcosm of this gigantic.
Yeah, no, that's just the exactly that's the tip of the iceberg, but that's the tip we can see. That's
Yeah.
why it's an iceberg, is because most of it's hidden. And but yeah, but absolutely 100%.
Well, throughout the rest of the planet, for untold stretches of time, just vast stretches of time, I think that the Nazca mummy situation has replicated itself, but they've not been assiduously preserved like they were in this case. And we're just fortunate that we live in a time when this iceberg tip has poked up above the surface, and we can feast upon it with our curiosity and our science. And so we're just very lucky, and this helps us to put together some of the puzzle pieces. So neither can they. They're not part of the natural world, and you might say, so they're trying to, through this hybridization program, become part of us. And also, these animal mutilations, they'll take all the blood, the brains, the reproductive organs, and I think on some level at least, it's an extension of what they're doing with us, because they know that the soul. I think they just make this basic mistake that they're trying to get what it is, that spark, that eternal spark that's in us and in other animals, even cows. Uh, Poor cows, even cows. They're trying to get at this eternal spark. They're poking and prodding and pulling things out of the body, saying that it must be here somewhere, that the soul. And so there's even an account I found to put in the book where a military man, was mutilated, found mutilated, his body after a UAP sighting, and he disappeared, and they found his body, and he too had his tongue removed, like most of these cattle do, his testes, and his body was drained out of blood. And I think it's just they're just seeking. They're I think it's kind of like the myth of Sisyphus, where he's pushing this boulder up the mountain for eternity, and trying his best to accomplish this feat. And it always rolls back down. And I think they are bumping their little noses up against up against the glass of our type of existence, which is a free existence, which doesn't bottle us up. Um, and they're on the outside looking in forever. And I think it's going to be like this. I don't think there's going to be a turning point where suddenly, they show up. I think the game they're playing has been played this way from the evidence of the earliest texts that we've discovered and translated, and it's going to stay this way. So it's sort of a boring suggestion or prediction that nothing's going to change, that we're locked in this perpetual game back and forth. But so they can't figure out how to get born. So what they do is they make these babies, these hybrid babies, and they're trying to accomplish the trick of being born, which is how Nigel Kerner says. And in one of David Jacobs' books, he quotes an abductee as saying, "God, it's like they've got babies there. They're in drawers and walls, little, like something in these drawers that pull out like in a lab." And John Mack's patient says
No,
there's all these.
I can only see your upper
Oh
part
yeah,
of
no,
your
sorry,
face
I
now.
forgot I'm on camera. Thank you. I'm reading. Um, Well, anyway, we've all seen, I won't go keep reading because that's boring for people, but we've all heard many, many reports of these abductees seeing all these fetuses all around. And I think that they're trying to crack the code of what it is to be born into the natural world. So they're trying to merge themselves with this. Nor can they experience a natural death. Um, Prudence, what's her last name? The excellent remote viewer. She goes by Bertie Jaworski,
Oh yeah,
too.
she's
And
great.
she did a remote viewing of the drone situation in the end of last year, and she kept having this phrase come to her: "Lack of death, lack of death." And I kind of latched onto that and said, "Yeah, they can't be born naturally, nor can they die naturally, because and that's what we and animals do. We're mortal creatures, and somehow that's part. I don't know how, but somehow that's a sine qua non. That's a pretentious word to use. It's a prerequisite for being able to um, have this broader conscious bandwidth. I don't know how that works. I'd like to figure that out, but they they're trying to enter the stream of time, as Ridley Strieber says. They're outside the stream of time, and they envy us our density and our living in time. When we die, of course, we move outside of time, but we need to be in an authentic life where everything is a surprise and we don't know what's happening next, and it's a real like a barn burner of a plot every for all of us. Like what we anything could happen tomorrow. We don't know. But for them, they're outside of time, so they can't. Whitley Strieber says they can't really be alive. They're sort of dead and alive at the same time, but they can't have a natural birth and they can't have a natural death. So for some reason, this means that they can't transcend to a natural afterlife. There's no resting in peace. They're constantly, like agitating. They're agitating. They're flying through the air. They're abducting us. They're scaring us. They're pretending to be beneficent. They're seeming like demons the next time. I think they're not moral on any spectrum of good or evil that we would apply. I think they're just going about their hungry business, trying to siphon off our our mortal spirits. There's these accounts where women whose fetuses who had an abduction experience were pregnant, and then their pregnancy vanished, and they're shown years later their child, who's a hybrid child, and the entities around, the more pure blood aliens, will say, hug your child, and then even
Yeah,
nurse your
that
child.
is so weird. Why
I
do
know,
they
you
do?
see that?
Yeah, yeah.
Nurse the baby, then this one account, nurse the baby. And I think they're thinking that, if I may be so bold, I think they're very literal minded. And they're thinking, well, if this baby can be nursed by a purebred human, maybe the mother's milk can actually infuse the child with this something, this magic potion or magic element that we have that they want. And like nurse the child. It's just so chilling. You can't even believe it.
Yeah, they think that if the mother can meet the child and it will leave some sort of psychic or emotional or soul imprint or something that will give them what they want.
Well, that they can
That's
drink
your
in, that they can
that's your
actually drink
idea?
in the soul, that the soul is a thing instead of, but I like to say, and I'm not original in this, but I like to think of the soul is not something in us, but we are in the soul. The soul is this large, it's this infinite, really. It's adjacent to the infinite, but it's our little fractal part of it. But it's much larger than you and me talking to each other. We each have a higher self that we're going to re-inhabit when we die. And so it's just a splinter of our true selves that's conversing right now today. And so we're inside the larger soul that you could call a soul, but it's really just bandwidth. And that may sound reductive to some people, but it's how I'm thinking right now. It's all of this is a work in progress, of course.
Okay, now, so I know you've touched on the mantis beings and that you think they may be related to the mantis beings here on Earth, the actual praying mantises in some way. And for the record, I think I mean I have always wondered why so many of these alien races look like animals here on Earth. I would, so absolutely. And now, a lot of experiencers do report that the mantis beings are kind of the overlords of the Greys. That they are directing the Greys in these abductions. How does your conception of things fit with that?
I just think there's a hierarchy, but that doesn't mean they're not all part of a single imperative. I think that sort of functionally or operationally, there needs to be some sort of social organization, and that there can be supervisors and then worker bees. I think most people agree that the Greys seem to be um, worker bees, but I think they're all biological robots, avatars of this one needy consciousness, you could say.
Okay, interesting. So there's the UFO phenomenon that we are seeing represents this challenger consciousness, whatever that is, whether it's singular or group of consciousnesses that want to come into our reality and inhabit. They want what we have,
Yeah.
basically, and they can't have it. So where did these consciousnesses come from originally? Do you have any idea who they are with their relationship to, other, consciousnesses that we may have heard about if you've researched, near-death experiences and you've, seen the beings that are said to exist in those realms, whatever those are, do they relate to that in any way? How does it all fit together in your idea?
Well, how it all fits together so far is above my pay grade. And when I get a raise, when I get a cognitive raise, pay raise, I'll let you know. But all I can say so far is that, consciousness itself had to begin somewhere. And there's lots of myths of origin back in the day. And Thomas Campbell talks about this and many others, that the Big Bang, or the beginning of existence, however you want to put it, happened. And then it was a single consciousness, and then it diversified into various sub subunits, and some have said that it's because the original consciousness, call it God or source, um, couldn't have any experiences just as a one thing, and so it needed to, in order to experience and to grow, it needed to um, diversify into all sorts of subsidiary consciousnesses, that are both autonomous and part and parcel of the whole. um, Rumi, the poet Rumi, said, um, not just not just the drop of water in the mighty sea, but the mighty sea within each drop of water. So I like that. So, and however it played out, we can't know. We're all just kind of absolutely pitiably, extrapolating from our little few neurons to try to figure out how that could happen. But it may be that this challenger consciousness just simply came to exist like anything comes to exist, and we can't say why. Why is the speed of light 186,000 miles per second? Just is. you know um, why is anything in the universe? It's just as we find it. So whatever development of different forms of consciousness occurred over billions and billions of years has, it seems, if I'm anywhere near on target with this hypothesis, um, has eventuated in this struggle between this other kind of consciousness and our kind of consciousness in animals. And the struggle is what we see playing out before us. It just seems to me empirically plausible that this is what's happening, but I can't get behind it in terms of origin.
Okay, well, let me ask this because if the challenger consciousness, if that's real and it represents, the phenomenon, or let's say part of the phenomenon, because, from my own research, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, it seems like what I call the UFO control group is working with beings, and they are doing things, whatever, assisting in abductions. I'm not sure how that relates to it, but if that is an agenda of the consciousness, a challenger consciousness, then it would seems totally plausible that they would enlist human help in this initiative, and that they would give us technology or whatever in exchange for that. But on the other hand, we seem to be shooting at other occupants of other UFOs. So, do you think that the challenger consciousness could represent part of the phenomenon, but there could be a distinct other group or groups that represent something entirely different? Whatever that is, that, we're working with one group of beings and shooting at another. Let's say that we're working with the challenger consciousness. Who are we shooting at?
I think there could be splinter groups within this. Again, it's the difference between splitters and joiners, and I'm trying to be lumpers rather, splitters and lumpers. And if you split, you say there's all these different groups, and they sometimes clash, and they're sometimes in coalition with each other. Um, or if it's one big phenomenon, then they may have different approaches and different splinter groups, but they're all kind of serving the same master plan. And some might think, they don't all have to think alike to be part of the same army, or whatever metaphor you want to use. Some may think it's better to try to work with us and get closer and closer and closer so that they can, wheedle their way into human existence and at least live vicariously through us, but try that way of merging with us by being our allies. And some others may be more adversarial and think the best way to merge is to keep getting eggs and sperm and making these babies and trying to learn the trick of being born. And others might think it's better to manifest as an angel, and like for Chris Bledsoe, and maybe that'll be the way. There to be different strategies could sort of engender themselves in the minds of these various factions, you could call it. That doesn't mean that they're different species. I never I always shy away when people say there's different species. Like people will say, well, these are from the Pleiades, and these are from Proxima Centauri, and the Pleiadians are like this, and it just seems premature. I don't walk in the shoes of those people who say they've experienced this, so I can't really say. I can't dispute them, but it doesn't make sense to me that there'd be. I didn't mention that before. Not only, not only would dead ringers for reptiles and insects and humans evolve over billions of years on a foreign planet, but some people say that there's numerous planets and that some come from there and they look just like these ones on Earth, and some come from there and they look just like these ones from Earth. It becomes more and more preposterous to me that we'd have this huge population of lookalikes from all these different planets near enough to get here. Meanwhile, we're scrubbing the skies constantly for incoming dangerous objects, and we don't see a superhighway of ships coming. So they would have had to get here a way, way long time ago. I guess that's possible, but this whole convergent evolution theory doesn't work for me, because we have convergent evolution here on Earth, of course, because there are seahorses and there are horses, and they look alike, but they have nothing to do with each other. But that's because we all start from a common root. So the convergence in history, in natural history, goes back to a common ancestor. So naturally, so you have that sort of platform to build on, so things can have parallel remedies to environmental stresses, and they can have different body plans, and they can sometimes have parallel solutions to these evolutionary challenges. But that's because we all start from the same place. But why would that start anywhere near similarly on another planet? Anyway, I've exhausted that whole line of thinking
Okay,
over and over.
well, let me ask you this. All right, different subject. Your book has Bigfoot on it.
Ah, that was
How
a
does Bigfoot fit into this? Any
that was a
idea?
that was a cheat. That was to bring in people who've read my Bigfoot books and think, oh, it's more Bigfoot. But there's
Okay,
no
okay. So,
Bigfoot.
so, so you've written about Bigfoot. What are your thoughts about Bigfoot?
Well, for 17 years, I was doing nothing but Sasquatch, and only in the last 3 years have I turned to spiritual matters and UFOs and such. Um, well, Bigfoot is. I like to say Sasquatch because Bigfoot is more like a tabloid name, and Sasquatch comes from a Native American word, so I prefer that anyway. Well, I just think that my next book is going to be about this, and so I'm really trying to gather. I'm wool gathering on that project. But I think that there's a relationship to the Challenger consciousness, and I don't know where Sasquatch really stands. Some people feel that they're like our spirit guides in animal form, and some people feel that they're the Nephilim and evil, and some people feel that they're just giant apes. Well, they're not just giant apes. They're smarter than us in many, many ways. They're very similar to autistic savants. And if anyone's interested in that, I have a book called Sasquatch and Autism. It's almost the perfect title for that topic, and especially autistic savants. And we've seen lately, in terms again of the telepathy tapes, that certain autistic children and adults have this ability, this enhanced psychic ability, and so do Sasquatch. I have a book called Mind Speak, in which many, many people contribute their testimonials about mental contact with their local Sasquatch group, contact that is corroborated again and again with what ends up, being experienced. Like they'll get a message, go check your back porch, and I'll go back there and there'll be like a gift, which could be a dead fish or a pretty stone or something, and they gift back and forth with their local Sasquatch group. Anyway, it's a huge subject that I devoted a big chunk of my adult life to, and I'm still on it, but I'm expanding now to these other spiritual and psychic matters, consciousness matters, right? So, but the short answer is they exist. I have a documentary in which I end up with a filming one 7 feet away, climbing an apple tree. And
Wow,
this documentary, I can't tell you the title. No, the title is How to See a Sasquatch. It's almost a perfect title.
I like
And
that. I like that.
um,
I want
it's
to
on
see
my
Sasquatch.
it's on my YouTube channel, which again is Impossible Visits.
Do you ever go squatching?
Squatching? That's how I spent 15 years of my life. I would,
Have you seen a Sasquatch?
yeah, I filmed one from 7 feet away.
That was you filming it.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you were sharing
Oh,
somebody else's
I didn't
video or
put that
not.
the right way. I didn't explain. Yeah. My approach was to go into forests, even small forests in the small city that I live in Montpelier, Vermont. I don't mind saying it. And even little forests, you sometimes find stick and tree structures that don't quite seem like people would like to make them. Like my daughter and I found like 25 thick branches with their ends broken off, all jammed in, wedged into a crotch in a tree, like 15 feet off the ground, like all jammed in there. People don't tend to do that. It
Yeah.
wasn't part of a tree fort or anything. It was just these branches jammed in. And Sasquatch do like to wedge things in. I have another book parenthetically here, since I'm mentioning stick and tree structures, another book. Boy, am I ever hawking my wares today. Called oh, I'll get my revenge, as I can't name the title. It's called A Field Guide to Sasquatch Structures: the 50 most common types in North American forests. Anyway, so you go. My approach was to go out, find these potential Sasquatch structures, then leave. Oh, where did I have it? I have this beautiful little audio recorder that you can program to just record at night. So I'd leave it, and so it would record from like 10 at night to 5 in the morning on some successive nights. And then you listen in real time, because you'll miss it if you just look for the spectrogram. And you'll hear wood knocks that they make, and then like an answer far away. Or you'll hear vocalization. They'll go, whoop, or you hear footsteps, whatever. So if you hear any of these Sasquatch telltale audio signatures, you'll know that probably they're the ones who made these structures. And then what I would do is go out and sleep there alone with my night vision camera. And I had all kinds of adventures, which are contained in that documentary I just mentioned. And it culminated on September 20th at 12:02 in the morning of 2022 with coming up next to, walking past an apple tree and hearing stamping on the ground. Like, I stopped and I turned my camera on it, and it was this juvenile Sasquatch. It was not even as tall as I am, and it was in there, and it was a full moon, and I had this night vision camera, which is the kind that just maximizes the available light. So it's pretty good, but then it goes underneath the canopy of the apple tree and it climbs up, and then the lighting isn't so good, but you can tell that it's a primate climbing a tree. And then for the next 11 minutes, he or she was up there, but hiding behind all this foliage because it was still hadn't fallen, the leaves hadn't fallen. And I got some shots of an arm going out and grabbing something and putting it in its mouth. I got 4 seconds, only four slim, precious seconds of its head in between two clumps of leaves, and I was able to, with the help of a friend, lighten that up and see the actual eye, the iris, and the pupil, and the shape of the face pretty well. But still, it's frustrating because all these years I went after this, like the Patterson film, like the next Patterson film, and this is the best I got. But I still feel privileged and thrilled to have gotten it. But I made a mistake. I went back to my backpack to get out the thermal camera, and when I got back, it was gone.
That sucks.
So you second guess yourself in all kinds of ways, but I did the best I could in the circumstances because I was so blown away. Anyway, that's another topic.
Man, that's incredible. All right, well, Christopher, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all this with us. I think they're amazing ideas. Everybody go check out Chris's book, Homegrown Monsters. Where can we find Homegrown Monsters?
I'm not going to tell you. Wait, that would be self-sabotage. No, 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 no. I better tell you. It's on Amazon, Amazon.com. It's a little known boutique shop. And
Well,
there's the Kindle is on there. The paperback is expensive because it's filled with color images, so which are costly to print. Lots and lots of color images all through the book. So the paperback is too expensive. So I would recommend buying the Kindle version, which has even vivider. Those pictures are better in the Kindle, and that's only $2.99. And there's an audio version which is just AI dubbed because I can't afford a real person. There you go. I
Oh,
can't.
and best of all, you quote me in one of the
Yeah,
chapters.
I quote you and then I quickly dismiss your viewpoint.
Thanks.
Yeah, because you were saying, well, let's briefly hit that. You were saying, oh, look at that. Those are ancient depictions of the same body plan that we find in the Nazca mummies today, and they're all over the world back in the day. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I was saying that if you want to interact with the consciousness, you send out love and light, and sometimes it can meet you halfway, which has
And I
been
was
my
just
own
saying, but
experience.
if, yeah, so I think it's like a chameleon, an emotional chameleon, and it can,
Well, see, but you may be describing the challenger consciousness, but remember, we do come from a higher set of
right.
dimensions, and those beings and energies interact with us as well.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
so we are dealing with different. If
right.
nothing else, then there's definitely two camps, and
Oh, yeah. I
I
think
recommend dealing with the good stuff.
No,
Uh,
exactly, exactly. I was just narrowly focused on the amoral, not immoral, but amoral aliens, and that they'll try any different emotional coloration to try to get close to you and resonate with you. There's a whole big thing about resonance in the book that we didn't get to for another day, but they want to resonate with us because that's their way of trying to what's the word I'm looking for? Merge with or just partake of our bandwidth for just as long as that encounter lasts, and they can feel like they're one of us, they're one with us and with our type of consciousness. But then they have to withdraw and back into their own type of consciousness. And I think these encounters and the incentive behind them is to resonate, not to. Uh, anyway, anyway, that's another 10 minutes of talk.
well, that's
Um,
all great thoughts, Christopher. I really appreciate it. And where else can people find you? You're on Twitter. You have a YouTube channel, Invisible, Impossible Visits.
Impossible Business is that my what do you call website is the nearness of you.net. The
Okay.
nearness of you.net. That's the nearness of you.net. And on Twitter, I'm Sasquatch Time.
Sasquatch time. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
And we
I've got
didn't
to go
even get
check
into
out some of your.
sublanimals. We didn't even get into sublanimals.
I know. I wanted to talk
Too
about
much
that.
to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. I've got to go to a bachelor's party, so I've got to get hit the road.
Yes, I
But
know.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the subliminal stuff is great. Chris on his YouTube channel, Impossible Visits, and I've talked about this before, but I encourage you to go check out his sublinimals. His what's the name of
Well,
that?
that just sounds like a nonsense word, doesn't it? But it's like subliminal animals. So I just put that together, sublanimals, and this is this apparent, and I think it's connected to the Challenger consciousness on some level. But it's this kind of UAP that's small, and people will think this is lunacy until you look into it. It can mimic birds and bugs, but they move much faster than birds and bugs. And of course, Robert Shipe, who's been on your show several times and is well known in our circle. Has pioneered the filming of these and slowing down the footage so you can see these little dark little and sometimes white sometimes different colored entities going behind aircraft so they're not right in front of the lens. And I am focusing on and we have Latchkey Hustle. There's really three horsemen right now. Latchkey Hustle is great. You got to go to his channel. Robert Shipe is Custodian File, and then you have Rob in England whose channel is Undercover ET UK. Those are the three you want to go to for this parent ecosystem of these invisible, normally invisible to the naked eye, these little creatures flitting around that you can, that if you, the, I know you have to go, but anyway, it's all in on my channel. On my first video, I do a little survey of this sort of new experiment that's going on,
Yeah,
and
no,
so
the highly anomalous creatures or whatever the heck they are, they kind of look a little bit like bugs or birds, but they don't seem to be bugs or birds. There's
but
something
they
else.
move much faster than bugs or birds, especially if you can determine that they're not right in front of the lens. And that can be difficult, and you have to apply critical thinking to that. And so my on my YouTube channel, you can go and see Sublanimals 1, 2, and 3. I have 3 videos so far. Anyway, if you're interested in this, and
No,
you should
I love it. I think that's
you
awesome.
should, you yourself, Jack, and you out there in TV land should try this experiment. I have just a $230 GoPro, and you can do 120 frames per second at 4K, and that's how I'm capturing these things that I have on those videos I just mentioned. So give it a try.
Nice, nice. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your research, everybody. It is an extremely well written, well researched book. He's got a lot more to say in his book. Very well written. Like I say, I just buzzed right through half of it. And so, yeah.
Bless your heart, Jack. Bless your heart.
So thanks for coming on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate you.